So, welcome back to a brand new deep dive. Today, we are getting into a pretty profound exploration of human memory, trauma, and honestly, how we even construct our sense of self.
Yeah, that's a big one today.
It really is. We're centering this around a fascinating piece of writing that is simply titled What You Save. And our mission for this deep dive is to completely reframe how you understand your own mind, especially during those moments of really high stress.
Right, because we want to explore why you remember the things you do. And this is the crazy part, why forgetting might actually be your superpower.
Oh, I love that concept.
Yeah, it challenges everything. And we'll get into how your identity isn't this fixed, straight timeline,
Right.
but more of a fluid fractal network.
Exactly. So, to set the hook for you listening right now, think about the last time you were in a screaming, high stakes argument. Maybe with a partner, maybe a family member. Adrenaline is pumping, doors are slamming.
Your heart is just practically beating out of your chest,
Is
right?
it? Right. But then an hour later, when the dust finally settles and you're sitting on the edge of your bed trying to process it all, you genuinely cannot remember what was actually said.
It's all just blank spots.
Massive, gaping blank spots. You can't remember the sequence of events or the counter-arguments. And yet, bizarrely, your brain is hyper-fixated on one agonizingly specific detail. Like, you can't remember the fight, but you remember crystal clear that your voice cracked on a certain word or you dropped your keys walking out the door.
Yeah, it's a terrifying feeling. You sit there reviewing the footage in your head, and the tape is mostly static, except for this one glaring high-def clip of, a perceived failure.
Totally. It makes you feel like your mind is fundamentally broken.
But it isn't.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the feeling we are dismantling today. The core premise of what you save is going to upend how you view these mental blank spots.
Right, because the argument isn't that you're broken or repressing the truth. The argument is that in those moments of extreme stress, your mind was just prioritizing absolute immediate survival. It couldn't save the data.
I mean, to really understand this, we have to look at the literal mechanics of the brain under pressure. We have to compare the untrained mind to, essentially, a broken video camera.
Let's start right there with that very first assertion the text makes. The idea that when you're in survival mode, your mind is hypervigilant, processing your surroundings, but it is not saving.
Right.
Which sounds completely backward to me, because if I'm in danger, shouldn't my brain want a perfect 4K record of the threat?
You would think so. But it comes down to cognitive bandwidth, biological triage, basically.
Mm.
In a state of hypervigilance, like a physical threat or even just an intense emotional threat like that argument, your sensory intake is just dialed up to an 11.
You're taking in everything.
Everything. An astonishing amount of visual data. You're experiencing auditory exclusion, where you tune out the background noise to focus. You're reading microexpressions. Your brain is a supercomputer running at max capacity, and the amygdala, your threat detection center, has essentially hijacked the whole system.
So it's basically pulling the fire alarm.
Exactly. It's pulling the fire alarm, locking the doors, and
Reverting all the power.
yeah, diverting all power to the engines just to survive. And because it's doing that, it completely shuts down the hippocampus.
Okay, remind me, what does the hippocampus do exactly?
So the hippocampus is the part of your brain responsible for time-stamping experiences and encoding them into long-term narrative memory.
Like the librarian.
Yes, it's the librarian. It takes the raw data, files it away, gives it context. But when the amygdala is screaming that you might literally die in the next 10 seconds, the brain decides the librarian is non-essential personnel.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It's like trying to record 4K video on your smartphone, but your phone is at like 1% battery.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. It's desperately searching for a cell signal, running 10 heavy apps in the background. The processor's working perfectly. It's running incredibly hot, doing millions of calculations just to keep the device alive, but it absolutely refuses to hit record on the camera app.
Because saving that video takes energy it desperately needs just to keep the screen from going black.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is how the author of What You Save phrases this. They use a really visceral metaphor. They write, if you feel safe, you can record a video. But if you are also listening for the floorboards outside the room, you can't remember what was going on.
Listening for the floorboards, that puts my stomach in knots just hearing it.
Right. It puts you right in that state of dread.
You're in a dark room, and your entire consciousness is projected out into the hallway, just waiting for that creak of wood.
And when you're doing that, you're exclusively in the present millisecond. You're just asking, am I safe now? How about now? Encoding long-term memory is a biological luxury. It's a luxury of a totally safe environment.
But wait, the text makes an interesting distinction here between us regular people and highly trained individuals. Because obviously, a paramedic doesn't black out and forget a car crash they just responded to, right?
Exactly. And that's because training alters the biological threshold for panic. For an untrained civilian, a crisis triggers this massive dump of adrenaline. The system redlines.
Just total system override.
Right. But for a paramedic or an elite pilot, their reactions rely on muscle memory rather than this hyperfiring system. They have drilled those emergencies thousands of times.
So the body already knows the choreography?
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex doesn't need to panic. The librarian, the hippocampus can actually stay online. They remain in control. But for the rest of us, wandering into a highly combative corporate meeting or a painful argument, our nervous system doesn't know the difference between a mean boss and a physical predator.
That is wild. It just knows we are unsafe. So high stimulants, intense environments, they just reduce our ability to save.
You aren't saving, you're just reacting.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly a little tragic. If the brain shuts off the main recording device during a crisis, what actually does get saved to the hard drive? Because we do remember some things.
We do. And the source reveals something pretty brutal here. You only end up saving survival-related things. You save the story as a narrative, but it's severely distorted.
Distorted how? Like, what's making the cut?
Well, think about it. The only thing you have control over in an unsafe situation is yourself. You can't control the environment or the attacker.
Right, I just control me.
So you don't save what you did right, you save what you did wrong, so you can figure out what to do differently next time.
Wait. So the brain survives an incredibly harrowing ordeal, barely makes it out intact, and the only souvenir it decides to keep is a hyper-fixated list of our own failures.
That's the one.
Isn't that an incredibly cruel design? I mean, why would it torment us like that?
It feels cruel, but it's a biological necessity. The mind isn't interested in making you feel good about yourself. It's interested in keeping you alive. It records errors because errors are actionable data. If you survive a tiger attack, remembering how brave you felt doesn't help you next time.
Right.
But remembering that you stepped on a dry twig, that is highly valuable data. It sears that mistake into your memory so you never do it again.
Wow. Okay, but we aren't running from tires anymore. We're navigating, like, modern anxieties. And the text notes that these little memories of mistakes, these drops, eventually form pools.
Yeah, that imagery of drops forming pools is so important. Think about your internal monologue. You have a few isolated memories of mistakes, stuttering in a meeting, dropping a glass when you were a kid.
Yeah, just everyday stuff.
But over years, those drops pool together into a deep, distorted self-narrative of total inadequacy. You think you're fundamentally flawed because your brain has a whole folder of evidence.
But the saved file is intentionally biased. It's rigged.
Exactly. It's just the data the survival system deemed useful. Realizing that allows you to grant yourself some grace.
That is so freeing.
Yeah.
But, okay, if our default biological setting is to pool together all our mistakes, how do we ever learn or grow or heal? Because the text suggests a highly counterintuitive solution here.
It really does. It plainly states that healing seems to involve a lot of forgetting.
Which sounds completely wrong. We're always told to do the work, dig into our past, analyze the trauma.
Right. Traditional views emphasize hyper-focusing on every detail. But because you only saved what you did wrong, over-attention just leads to embodying the error. The text uses playing the piano as this brilliant example.
Oh, the piano paradox.
Yeah. It's as if we didn't pay attention, we embodied the learning. But if we paid attention, we embodied the mistakes.
I relate to this so much. Think about playing a fast-paced video game or even just riding a bike. The second you consciously pay attention to what your thumbs or your feet are actually doing,
You crash.
you completely crash. You suddenly forget how to walk. But when you zone out and forget the mechanics, you enter a flow state. You embody the action.
Because you shift the processing away from the slow, conscious part of your brain to the automatic part. If a piano student stares at their fingers, they tense up and repeat their mistakes. The teacher will tell them to look away, stop paying attention.
And suddenly they play it flawlessly.
Exactly. So, applying this to healing. If you obsessively review the footage of a bad breakup, analyzing every wrong word you said.
You're just practicing your trauma responses.
Yes. You are rehearsing the mistake, stepping back, forgetting the sharp details, and allowing the muscle memory of your emotional growth to take over might be a much more profound form of healing.
That is wild. Moving away from constantly relitigating past errors. But to do that, to shift from analyzing mistakes to embodying flow, I mean, that requires a completely new framework for how we view our psychology,
It
right?
does. We have to completely depathologize the self.
Right, because usually we look at the mind like a machine. Like, if it's broken, we need to x-ray it, diagnose the busted gear, and fix it.
But the source argues that aligning with physics and dynamic systems works much better, but only when interpreted without pathology. It introduces the metaphor of a river.
A river. Okay, I like that.
It's fluid, it's connected, it's a less pathologizing way to understand ourselves. If a river floods after a storm, we don't say the river has a disorder or is diseased.
Right, it's just responding naturally to its environment.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for how we view our own broken parts? If we stop looking at the mind as a machine that needs diagnosing and start looking at it as a river, how does that change the listener's day-to-day self-perception?
It removes the stigma of fluctuation.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an anxious week, a pathologizing view says, I am permanently broken.
Uh-huh.
The river metaphor lets you say, the waters are turbulent right now. It's a natural response to the terrain.
Got it.
And the text combines this with two other concepts, the seasons of the self and the helix.
Let's talk about the helix, because
Yeah.
we all get that feeling of, ugh, I'm dealing with the same issue again. I'm just running in circles.
Right, it feels like regression.
Yeah.
But a helix is a three-dimensional spiral. You might cycle back to similar struggles or seasons in your life, similar themes, but because a helix continuously moves forward and upward, you are never in the exact same spot.
Oh, wow. You're facing the same view, but from a higher vantage point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have more tools now. And this connects to the inward and outward perspective. Sometimes you are facing inward, like a winter season of introspection and rest, and sometimes outward, a summer of action.
And we tend to pathologize the winter. We think, oh, I'm being antisocial. I need to fix this. But it removes the guilt of not being perfectly consistent. You're allowed to have a winter.
You have to have a winter.
But okay, wait. If we are constantly moving like a river or spiraling up a helix, what happens to the heavy rocks at the bottom? Like our old traumatic memories, the really deep stuff.
This is where the text gets incredibly profound. It describes the mind breaking. It really means a breakthrough, a shedding of the old self. And it says memories become like a million notes, and mostly they're incoherent.
Incoherent note.
Yeah. Why? Because as the author learned more, saw more of the world, and gained wisdom, their old notes made less sense.
Okay, I need to challenge this. Usually we think wisdom brings absolute clarity to our past. Like everything finally makes perfect sense on a timeline. But this source is saying that getting wiser actually makes your old memories feel incoherent, that you lose your mental connection to your own story.
It does say yes.
Isn't that terrifying? Like you're losing who you are?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually the ultimate liberation. The memories, the actual facts of what happened, didn't change. But your wisdom changed the instrument playing them.
Oh, interesting.
The disconnect you feel isn't amnesia. It's detachment from a rigid, painful narrative. When you were in survival mode, you built a tight, sad story out of those notes because it was the only way to survive. But as you spiral up the helix, that old song just doesn't fit anymore.
You're too vast for it now.
Exactly. You understand the story better from an eagle-eye view, but you no longer feel forced to live inside it. The text literally says you can now see it as just one of many histories you can embody.
You can embody any history. The freedom of realizing your past doesn't have to define your present emotional state is huge. But if you detach from your own memories, how do you know who you are?
Right, what grounds you?
Yeah. If my internal world is just a million incoherent notes, what keeps me from just floating away?
And that brings us to the lattice network. The text anticipates this exact fear. It says you don't have to move in a linear direction. You can move in any direction on this lattice. And crucially, it states that coherence is held by our environment no matter what we do with our internal world.
The environment holds our coherence.
Yes. The author explains their identity by saying they can look at their environment and go, oh, this life. Got it.
It's like an actor waking up on a theater stage with temporary amnesia.
Oh, I love this.
You know. You don't need to dig through your internal memories to know what to do. You just look at the set. If you see a stainless steel kitchen counter and you're wearing an apron, you go, oh, I'm the chef today. Got it. You trust the physical world to hold the story for you.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it is a radical departure from Western psychology, which usually insists that coherence must come from this strong, unchanging internal sense of self.
We're told we have to be the anchor.
Exactly. But the text argues that the environment is the anchor. The lattice network means you can move laterally into completely different modes of being depending on where you are.
Think about what this means for the listener when they feel completely lost internally. The advice here is not to look deeper inward into the hurricane of incoherent notes. The advice is to look outward. Let the physical reality of your room or your job or the dog sleeping at your feet tell you who you are in this specific moment.
It takes so much pressure off.
Yeah.
But we still have to ask, who is the you walking through this environment?
Right. If the stage holds a coherence, who is the actor?
This is where we get into fractal identity and the adventuring party. The text states that the seasons of the self exist beyond identity. Even sub-identities have their own seasons within them.
Okay, so it's an identity made of seasons, representing a season that built the identity. The author admits it is fractal and confusing.
It is fractal, meaning the pattern repeats at every scale. You aren't just one monolith. You are an ecosystem of parts, a professional self, a parenting self, each going through their own winters and summers.
Right, your career self could be in a vibrant summer, while your romantic self is in a devastating winter.
Exactly, but it still provides coherence. And the author uses the best analogy for this. They compare it to a party doing different campaigns, but the party is still the party.
Okay, let's unpack this party analogy. We're talking about a role-playing game here, like Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Wow, yeah.
How does a D&D campaign explain the fractal nature of human identity? It sounds so nerdy, but I'm here for it.
It's actually a perfect map for the psychology. Just think of a gaming group 4 friends sitting around a table. That's the core party. That represents your fundamental consciousness.
Got it.
Now, they might play a high fantasy game on Tuesday. That's the environment, the campaign. They roll up characters like a wizard or a knight. Those are the sub-identities.
They embody that specific history.
Right. But then on Thursday, they play a gritty sci-fi game. The environment changes completely. They become space hackers. Magic doesn't exist anymore.
So they completely adapt to the new stage.
Exactly. But, and this is the crux, the party is still the party. Their core bond, the friends sitting at the table, remains totally intact. The self is this ecosystem of parts going through campaigns.
That is so assuring. It tells the listener that feeling multifaceted or contradictory or fractal doesn't mean they are broken. It means they are a complex, resilient system. You just adapt to the campaign you're in.
It really is a beautiful way to view the mind.
We have covered so much ground today. I mean, we moved from understanding why survival mode breaks the brain's record button
to why forgetting our mistakes is actually the true path to healing.
We replaced the broken machine metaphor with the flowing river and the helix. We learned that wisdom can actually make our old memories irrelevant in a good way.
And that our environment, not our internal monologue, holds our coherence together, just like a party embarking on different campaigns.
It's just an incredible permission slip for the listener, a reminder that your mind's tendency to hold on to what went wrong was just a survival tool. You have permission to let go of those million incoherent notes and just trust the lattice network of your present environment.
For sure.
But before we completely sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought, something to just mull over on your own that builds on these final concepts.
Oh, let's hear it.
If your environment is what truly holds your coherence together and your internal party simply adapts to the campaign it finds itself in, what would happen if you woke up tomorrow and radically, completely changed your environment? If you completely changed the stage set, who would your party become? Think about it. Until next time.